All right. Good afternoon, evening. This is the last session of a long day. How many of you started at the very first session? You've been continuing? Oh, wow. You all are really, really hardcore here. As you might recognize from my accent, that I'm from the United States. I work at Microsoft at our corporate offices in Redmond, Washington. I'm an HTML5 evangelist there. And I've worked with a bunch of different customers who have been doing HTML5 apps and have been talking to a lot of people about various HTML5 topics. This one in particular is really something that I'm fond of. And what's kind of cool about this is that this isn't a product talk. So I'm not sort of marketing something to you. It's actually a concept that was built by someone else. But I think it's really neat and wanted to share it with you all. So I just want to clarify again, there was a time switch. So if you were here for Chasing the Evolving Web, you're in the wrong place. It's going to be at 9:45 tomorrow. 9:45 tomorrow somewhere here. So I apologize if this is if this doesn't meet the bar of that one, but I think you'll like what you see. So how many of you all were in my earlier talk on the future of web design? Okay, so quite a few of you. What I'm going to try to do is we're actually going to finish a little early today. I hope you don't mind. What I may do is to tweak a little bit of the talk around media queries because we talked about that quite a bit. So I'll tighten it up, but I'll also talk about some things that I didn't talk about media queries in this one that I didn't talk in that one, or vice versa. Anyway, so some of these may look familiar to you at first, but I'll probably try to spin them a little bit differently. So let's kind of talk about the world as we see it sort of today, or how we've seen it before, which is we typically think of the desktop browser as our view into the web, right? So when people say, hey, I'm going to go view the web, the traditional thing is we're sitting in front of a desktop or a laptop machine. We're opening up a browser, whether it be Internet Explorer, Firefox, Chrome, Opera, any of the other ones that might be out there. Now, what we do know is that times have changed, right? We now have not only desktop browsers, but we have these really rich mobile browsers. We have tablet form factors. We even have it where we can watch the internet on our television, which I'm not quite sure exactly if we want to see web pages on televisions, but we definitely want to see content that we get streamed to us. So we should ask ourselves, well, then, what's the problem? Well, the problem is that a lot of times we're not thinking necessarily about the experience of our users when we're building our websites, and that possibly they may be coming to our website in a way that we just never really thought of. So what I always like to do is I like to start off with sort of the anti-pattern, or what is it that you don't want to do. And what I actually did was I decided that I would go ahead and show you my blog as the anti-pattern. So there's a few things that you should notice first off. Number one is that you can see the gray on the sides there that takes up a lot of that space that could be used for other purposes. Hopefully not ads, but you get the point. The other part is that this is a very fixed width type of website. So here, for example, if I go ahead and I grab my window, as I scroll in, I actually start going over the content. And you can see that we start getting scroll bars showing up here, which, we aren't big fans of the vertical scroll bar in the design sense. So there is that kind of thing that, we try to stay away from. Also, let's look at content versus space. So here, for example, I'm going to scroll down here, and I have a picture of my cat, Neptune, which if you were in the earlier thing, in every presentation I do, my wife requires that if I travel, I have to show one of our pets. So this is Neptune, our cat. But notice here that if I bring up the F12 tools in Internet Explorer, and I'm actually going to use the ruler, we can take the ruler and we can see that if I look across the entire browser width, I have 983 pixels, and it's because, here we have to to display, we have to use a smaller resolution. But you could imagine that if I had a really big resolution of 1300, how much space there would be. Now, if I look at the content, and I'm just going to go ahead and do another line here. If you notice, my content is about 379 pixels. So the content that people supposedly are coming to my website to see is actually less than half of the width that I could be giving them of great content and pictures of more cats and dogs. And so this is kind of an example of what you don't really want to do or what you don't want to create if you want to create something that's responsive and dynamic to the various devices that are out there. Now, since I showed you something ugly, let me show you something that hopefully will be of help to you. So you don't need to take any notes here or writing down these crazy links that I'm going to show you, because on my website I've actually put a link to everything here that I'm going to talk about. So if you just go up to the website, it's asimplepixel.tumblr.com, and I'll tell you that again at the end. It has all the links and everything that you need there, so you don't have to write notes unless you want to. And so that's another example. Now, what's going to be interesting is that you're going to get so used to trying to figure out, like, hey, are sites being responsive, that you're actually going to start testing them out, right? And so, of course, there was one that I had to test out, which maybe you've been to this one before. And so I, of course, went over here and started grabbing and looking, and, I'm right at that edge. Will it respond? How many believe it will respond? Oh, boy. They told me Aussies, they're kind of cantankerous and jaded. And yes, you're right. Look. Boom. It goes over across there. So what you're going to find yourself doing after this presentation is that you're going to keep finding yourself going to websites and grabbing that window and going back and forth to see, is it truly responsive? So let's now go to something more positive. So we have this challenge, right, that people are building these very fixed websites. And in fact, you're seeing a lot of people, what they're doing is they're going, well, you know what, to make my life easier, I'm just going to use 960 pixels, right? We all sort of somehow came to agreement that we'll build it 960 pixels, we'll center it, and then we'll just keep it there. And that should be good enough, right? And so what happens is that, if you're fortunate enough to have one of these big monitors, you bring up somebody's, Tumblr blog like mine, and you go, wow, here's how much space they actually use for content, and here's all this space that could be used for something else. So we've got kind of this thing going on. We also have this weird thing. Have you ever had a friend send you a link to something, and you go onto your desktop browser, you open it up, and it's just text and maybe like these small images, and it's all jammed up to the left-hand side. And then what you do is you go to the URL, and you'll see something like m. or /mobile, things like that. Well, that's, again, a way that we're not thinking about being responsive in our designs, because what we're doing is we're building for a particular device or purpose versus the capabilities of that device. Now, there is a super smart person named Ethan Marcotte. And what he did was he wrote this article called Responsive Web Design on a List Apart. If you're interested in design, and you don't even have to be a designer, this is a great place to go to. They have such amazing content here that it's unbelievable. So it's one of those that when I see that in my reader, I go ahead and read anything that's placed up there. Now, the thing is, Ethan Marcotte wrote this article called Responsive Web Design. And he's this designer that's done some really cool things. He has a website that has the best name ever. It's unstoppablerobotninja.com. It's the coolest thing. And it's responsive. If you drag the window, it will work. And what he did was he basically said, I think that there is a method by which we can create responsive sites. And he kind of came up with this conceptual method on what to do. And so he came up with this concept of responsive web design. And so what he did was he said, we need to think about our users' needs rather than ours, right? Because it's very easy for us to do things for ourselves. That's when we find ourselves using tables for layout, where we do things where we kind of create these very fixed width or fixed height things that we end up doing. And we do it more for ourselves than for our users. And then also, he said what we need to do is we need to adapt for various device capabilities instead of configurations. Because we tried to solve this problem before, where we would say, okay, what we'll do is we'll build a library. And for every type of device that's out there, we'll build a library that'll go ahead and move things around for us and make ourselves happy. I've only seen one library that does that with really good success, and that's jQuery. Other than that, I find that it becomes a real challenge, or you take a big performance hit to be responsive, or what most people do is they just are lazy, and then they say, I'll put that later. You know, that goes into another Scrum. The other thing, too, is that if we kind of think about responsiveness in a design for a web page or a web app, it will actually help us future-proof our site. So, for example, when the iPhone came out and we had this mobile browser, the apps and the websites that did the best were people who had used standards-based methodologies, right? They had their HTML for the structure and the content. They had CSS for the styling and things like that. Because what would happen is that, you know, the mobile device would look at the structure and go, okay, here's how it's going to look, and if it could handle the styling, it would do it, and if not, it would leave it alone. So with responsive web design, we take a lot of these web standards into our account, and we can create something that's very future-proof. Now, I showed you some ugly stuff. Let me show you some interesting websites that actually do this. If you were in the one from this morning, I actually have brand new ones to show you so that you don't get bored. Okay, so the first one I'm going to show you is this DMIG5, and it's from Germany. I can't read German, so I don't know what this is, but when I saw a cat, a rooster, a horse, and a dog hanging out together in this weird pattern, I was like, okay, this is going to be pretty cool. So, of course, what's the first thing that I'm going to go and do? I'm going to grab that window, and I'm going to start bringing it in. So you'll notice that they use the media queries just to kind of give it a different styling. So what happens is that as it gets closer in, you'll notice two things happen. One is they got rid of the DMIG in the background. They also got rid of some of the text that was in the top because it was about to hit the Design Made in Germany magazine August 5th issue. And then, like I said, as we pull it in, and so we kind of reflect more of a mobile situation here in the browser, you can see that we got rid of some of the extra cruft. The 5 got moved to something nice. The artist name here in Powered by WordPress still looks good. Now, this is kind of just a real simple one, but I was blown away by this, that when you start scrolling down, the animals there stay, but in the background, they load up a background image of the rooster sitting on the cat, sitting on the dog, sitting on the horse. And I was just like, oh, isn't responsive web design the most awesome thing ever? So I expect that each and every one of you will go out and build responsive web designs like this. But I know some of you are saying, Thomas, listen, we're in the enterprise. We do serious stuff. We don't have time for dogs sitting on cats, talking to trees, and stuff like that. I need something that I can take back to my boss and show is responsive, but it's something interesting. So there's this Illissimo that you may have drank before, which is, I guess, some kind of pleasurable coffee from Italy. And here it's just your simple thing, right? It's got a listing of the different drinks they have. They've got some, nice-looking European guy, drinking his Illy. Let's see if we can get someone else here. No, we're going to still get that same guy. Okay. So what they did, much better. Much better. Sorry, I just don't want to spend a lot of time looking at European guys. So what happened is they said, well, what we want to do is we want to build a responsive design so that if someone is looking at it in a mobile view or in a smaller view, that it will still look good. So for example, when I start pulling this in, notice that our coffee is about to go ahead and go up against the image of the young lady. And instead of going ahead and hiding her or hiding the actual product, what happens is it'll go ahead and it pops into a mobile version. So they did a few things here. One is they went with a smaller graphic of the young lady. They also went from multi-column to this single column. And so they have the ability to say, hey, based on the device capability, I'm going to render in a particular way. So that was kind of interesting. Not as cool as a dog sitting on a horse, sitting on a cat, but it's very close. Now, this is a way to hopefully redeem myself somewhat, maybe. So this is a site that I put together, and it's actually based on a Tumblr, a custom Tumblr theme. So a lot of times what people complain about is like, oh, this responsive web design and HTML5, it's all cool and everything, but I'm working on some kind of content management system and it just doesn't work out right. So one of the things that I was able to do is to find a Tumblr theme that was very sensitive to, again, the view or the width of our browser. And what HTML5 Shelf is basically me taking all the cool stuff I find and throwing it up on the site to take a look at. So if you're ever interested in just kind of keeping up with sort of what's cool, like what's the neatest HTML5 game or what's the coolest JavaScript tool that's out there right now, you can go up there and take a look at it. This is also kind of nice because it will scroll across. So if you're on a touch screen, you can kind of scroll across and you'll see these various things. If I basically pull in on the window, you'll see that it totally just goes off the radar. All right. Oh, here we go. So what happens here is it just goes ahead and takes the navigation that was built at the top and lines it up. Then each individual item is basically put on a shelf, as you can see here. And so this is just another example of a website that takes advantage of like a Tumblr theme. And you're starting to see some WordPress themes that are coming out as well that use HTML5 and are responsive too. So let me jump back. So let's get down into the details. So Ethan Marcotte came up with this responsive web design concept. And he said, well, a responsive app has sort of three elements to it. The first thing is that it has to have a flexible grid-based layout. Second, it has to have flexible images and media. And then third, it needs to use media queries. And then he also has now started during his talks talking about this kind of fourth thing. And to keep you guessing, we're going to tell you what the fourth thing is later on. So let's talk about flexible grid-based layout first. So the problem that we've seen so far is non-responsive sites aren't any fun, right? Because we can't grab that window and move back and forth. Fixed width sites do not provide the best experience, as we saw with my blog. And that design tools, what's interesting about them is that they tend to use pixels. And the problem with pixels is that they're fixed, right? So if I have something that's 100 pixels, that's a fixed width. And so what we need to also understand is sometimes sometimes a pixel does not equal a pixel, meaning that there are times where you can find that, hey, what I think is a pixel is actually different based on things like resolution and things like that. So what we need to do is we need to figure out a way to take something that is fixed and instead use something proportional. And the way that we do that is we take something fixed like a pixel and we just convert it to an M, which is more of a relative way of defining the size of something versus pixels. So what we need to do is we need to come up with what's kind of the equation to make this thing happen. And so this is the equation. And what we'll do for the next 15 minutes is we'll go through each and every element of this. So please, no. This is the beauty of it. It's actually pretty simple. It's taking the target you have, divide it by the context, and that's how you're going to get your result. And what the heck do I mean by that? So let's take an example. So at the very top, let's say that this is what the designer gives me. They give me an H1 that has responsive web design, and then there's going to be a link that's read more that's in an anchor tag, right? And so we want one size to be 24 pixels. We want the read more to be at 11 pixels. And so how do we go about and make that change? Well, the first thing we do is we look at what we have available to us. So if I have that H1 that I'm working with, that responsive web design, I'm going to see that my font size is 24. Now, what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to take that 24 pixel size target and divide it by its context. And the context is 16. And you might be asking yourself, where the heck did that 16 come from? Well, that's the default of the browser if you don't go in and do a reset on it. So 16 pixels is kind of the typical definition for an H1. And what you do is you basically, again, divide the target by the context, and you get 1.5. And then you just go back into your CSS, and you make the font size 1.5 ems, and boom, you're good to go. Now what you've done is you've gone from something that was fixed, the 24 pixels, and you now have something that's proportional, so the 1.5 em. Now, you might be saying to yourself, well, this is kind of odd because, that would mean that read more would, be, 24, pixels as well. Well, what we do is we say, okay, you are correct. That anchor tag, the font size is 24 pixels. But what we're going to do is we're going to divide our target, which is the 11 pixels that we want it to be, or the designer gave us the specs for it and said, hey, this is supposed to be 11 pixels. We divide it by 24, and then we get this really long number. In fact, it would go out a little more than that. So then what we do is we just, within our CSS, we put in that very long number. And again, you don't put the plus sign here, you put in the very long number. And the thing is that don't feel the need to go in and make it like 4.46. The browser's smart enough to do it for you, so go ahead and leave it the full number. That way your proportions will always come out right. Now, this is something that takes a while to sort of get into the swing of. It's not something that you'll just automatically right away just go and do. I'm honestly hoping that someone has already built a tool out there that I can just point it at my CSS, and it'll go ahead and figure out all these and replace them, and it'll just be all responsive goodness. But it will take a little bit of time. Now, what you may be wondering is, but I thought you said earlier that, Ethan Marcotte said that we had to do something about a grid. And you can actually do this. So the thing is that we have something like a blog, right? So here's sort of our original thing that we were given from the designer. We have a page with a certain margin set and a width. Again, those evil 960 pixels. And by the way, 960 is going to now be one of those new numbers that when you hear it, you're going to go, uh-oh, something's up here. And how many of you, by the way, are designers? How many of you all are developers? Okay, so us designers, I'm going to give you something for us. This is something you're going to be able to do with your designers, right? Because sometimes we get a little smug, right with you. We tell you like, oh, what you should be doing is you should be doing blah, 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 CSS. And you're like, hey, I'm trying to really write some code here, turtleneck. And so, we can be that way. So now what you should do is when the designer gives you something with 960 pixels, you should just go, 960 pixels? Responsive? Leave it at that, and your designer is just going to go back and go, what? How did the developer know about the 960 pixel thing? So that's just a little something I'm going to give you that's kind of given up on my own designer friends. But if you see 960 pixels, be aware. You might be running into some problems. Now here, for example, we get the page of 960 pixels. We have a blog, and of that blog, we have sort of the main part, and then we have sort of the secondary the column for other. So how do we, again, convert those pixels into something that is a little more proportional, such as percentages? So here you can see I'm using this kind of second column as the way to do our math. So here, for example, for the blog, I'm going to, again, take my target, which we're going to pick 900, and this 900 got picked kind of just out of the cloud. There's no magic there. It was just kind of what looked good on the page. So 900 divided by 960, we're going to take our main. We're going to, again, divide 566 divided by the 900, and then again, 331 divided by 900. And again, target divided by context equals result, and then boom. Here's your numbers that play out for you. And again, take off the pluses, let it go all the way out, and you'll find that the proportion will work out right. And what's nice now is, again, we're not in a fixed mode. So if someone was to push that blog smaller and smaller, it would still retain the right proportions for it. And so this is just kind of a really cool trick. And again, it may take a little while to get the math, in your head going all the time, but once you get it, you're going to be like, oh, why did we ever do anything in pixels? Now, the second thing that he said is we need flexible images and media, right? Because what we don't want to do is we don't want to have a nice sized image, and when we drag that window over, that we actually go over that image or that content. We also need to be aware that we may have an image that needs to scale depending on the device that's being used. So for example, if I have a device that has a high resolution, maybe what I want to do is provide a high-res photo instead of something that's kind of small and choppy and looks bad. So what he did was he came up with this really, really simple thing, even simpler than the first thing, which is for your image, make the max width equal to 100, and that's it. What it will do is it will actually scale and it'll scale and expand and contrast based on the containing item on the page. So this is kind of cool because not only does it work on images, but it works on other media as well. So if you have a video, the video will scale with that too. Now, I've got a simple demo up here, so let me click over. This is called Robot or Not. This was a website done by Ethan Marcotte to figure out if someone is a robot or not. But again, I'm going to go ahead and grab, and when I pull it in, notice how things kind of react to the device width that I have here. I also have some nice imagery here, some really high-res imagery. And when I scroll down, you'll notice that the imagery still looks good. And in fact, if I was to look, it's called slide-round.jpg. And if I pull out for this into a much bigger picture, it's slide-round.jpg. Now, what you might be thinking to yourself right now is, I think there's a problem here. And there is a problem. And this is probably one of the most challenged things about Ethan Marcotte's concept. In that what happens is that if you have a high-res image and someone is looking on it on a mobile device, well, they have to download that entire high-res image even if they needed a lower-res image. So this can make the page weight be, astronomical, right? And it's not very efficient. It's not bandwidth friendly whatsoever. But what the good news is that we have a couple of things that we can use to get around that. So I'm going to talk about one a little bit later that's more around media queries, but there's this thing that was built by the Filament Group. And what they did was they built a library that basically does a 1K call to find out what is the resolution of the device. If it is small, then it'll go ahead and use a small image size and bring that down. If it's something that can handle something bigger, then you'll get something big and huge like this. Now, the only thing is that it does depend on cookies and JavaScript. So if you are in an environment where JavaScript is turned off, you're not going to have any luck with this. So the third thing, in which I think is probably the most important thing, is media queries. Because what we need is a way to ask a device, what are the capabilities that you have? So instead of saying, hey, what browser are you, and then rendering that way, because we got ourselves in quite a pickle when we used to do that, right? And still today, we have these scenarios where we'll go to a website and it'll say, oh, I'm sorry, we don't support that browser. Or, oh, you don't have the correct version of this browser, and you may even have the latest, newest browser, but they went in and wrote and hard-coded some things. And I'm not judging if any of you have done that, but it just seems to happen sometimes. And so what you need is a way to say, instead of saying, hey, are you this browser or are you this device, instead you should be asking, what are the things you can do? What are your capabilities? So are you in portrait or landscape mode? Are you, is the device width, over 1,300 pixels? Then you may want to do something with that. Now, we've been able to define media types, right? So back a while back, the W3C came up with, in 2.1, these media types of screen and print, and they have some others as well. But they really didn't cover the gamut of what it is that we needed, because what does it actually mean if it's a screen? The other thing that we talked about earlier today was handheld was another media type that we could work with. And the question is, what does handheld mean? And can we get all the browser vendors to agree what does handheld mean? And I don't think we can. We also it wasn't very easy to respond to a user's display. We didn't really have a lot of things to work with because a lot of times the browsers will even lie to us, right? We even had it where browsers would say that they were different browsers so that things would render correctly. And the good news is that we're starting to right all those wrongs and that stuff is going away, which is fabulous. But again, we didn't think too much about mobile devices, and nowadays we are into this concept of thinking about not only mobile devices, but even mobile devices being the first thing we think about. If you go to a lot of the web design conferences now, they're espousing this thing called mobile first or content first, which is instead of thinking about designing a desktop browser website, instead first start with the mobile device and your mobile site, and then go from there, which is kind of interesting. It gets you thinking about things that you probably didn't think about before. So, like I said, Media Queries provides a way for us to figure out the precise device capabilities. It's really easy to create these queries. You give it a media type, so it can be media screen, print. You can even do all. If you leave nothing there, then it just assumes that all media types are fine. 9 times out of 10, you'll use screen. But then what you do is you actually create the query part of it. So what you do is you say, and is the max width of the browser 600 pixels? So if our width is less than 600 pixels, then what I want to do is apply the font size style of the body and make it 80%. And so this is pretty much how media queries work. You define a query, and then if it's true, all the styling under it gets applied. So now what's kind of cool is that we can define all these different media queries, and we can basically say, hey, if this is true, then I want you to style it in this particular way. And we have other ways of doing things. So we can say, hey, I want to look at, I want this query to fire off if the width is between 320 pixels and 480 pixels. We can do not semantics, and then we can actually combine things as well. Now, the thing that you can do, you can actually put these queries in a variety of places. So you can put it in the style sheet that you're working with, you can use an import rule, or you can use a link element. The best practice is to go ahead and use it within the style sheet because you're actually going to be as close as you can to the styling that you're going to do. Also, as well, that you won't have as many HTTP requests as well, so you get a lot more fine granular control. Now, there's a few supported media properties that we have available to us. So we can interrogate max and min width, min-max height, device width and height. So when you look at kind of the difference between those two, the max height and width height is based on the kind of the viewport of the app itself. So the browser, for example, it looks at the width of the viewport within the browser. Now, device width and device height are different because device typically, the way the browser is set up is that there is no Chrome on the side. So the width is all the way across, or we're going to go all the way across height-wise for that. So if you ever kind of wonder why your numbers may be a little off, it might be because you've mistakenly put device instead of the min height or min height versus device height. Also, orientation. So what I can do is I can say, hey, if the orientation is landscape, then what I want to do is I want to go ahead and style based on that versus being in portrait mode. There's also things like aspect ratio, resolution, whether it's monochrome or not, and there's going to be more and more of these that are going to be added. But right now, those are the kind of ones that are part of the spec today. And what you'll find out is probably most of the time, you're going to be working with width. That's going to be probably the biggest thing that you'll find yourself using. So let me show you a demo of a site that actually uses it, and we'll go dig down into it a little bit. So this is called the Little P Bakery. And what you can do is you can see here that it's your typical 3-column layout with navigation on the left side. You have the content in the middle, and then some good side items over here. As you are going to now be responsible for doing all the time is going to a website, grabbing the side of the window, bringing it in, and you notice one thing that happened was that all of a sudden we now are down to 2 columns. We actually moved the navigation from the left side up to the top so that we have a little more room to play with, and it looks aesthetically better. As I continue to pull these in, you'll notice some things that happen. One is the navigation is about to jam right into our logo. But we're not going to let that happen because we're going to have a query that's going to kick in that's actually going to put it under the logo. Also, you may notice that down here that our 3 mini columns now not only have a smaller image, but we've now kind of put them in a different format. So instead of this sort of a vertical format, we are now doing it as a horizontal format. And then as we get into something that is a little more mobile, you'll notice that our images actually got a lot smaller. We actually changed a little bit of the line spacing. And then, of course, we started kind of collecting our navigation here. So what's kind of nice is that we can actually go in and take a look at it via the F12 tools. So I can go in here, for example, and look at the code that we have. And if I look, there's going to be a few things that you see. One is that she actually puts the CSS within the HTML file, which we don't really recommend that you do that, but for having it as a sample, I think we can get away with that for now. But she has a set of media queries here. So what you can see here is that the first media query she has is she's looking to see what the width is. So for this instance, she's saying, okay, if it is the media type of screen and the minimum width is 1200 pixels, meaning do we have a browser window or a device window that's bigger than 1200 pixels, then what I want you to do is to go ahead and apply these different styles. So you can see here that, she does some things like the position is set to fixed, no margins, added some box shadows here, border radiuses, and then aligning the text to the right. And we can continue to see that here. Now, what you'll notice is that she went ahead and put these down at the bottom of the CSS. And the reason that you want to do this is because of the first part of CSS. Cascading. So the cascading rule says that if I see something further down that is a style on something that was up here, so let's say the color was blue up here for something, and then down here I say the color should be orange for that same element, this thing is going to win out over that. So what she does is she puts those queries at the end so that she's not affecting anything above that she's already put in place. And then she does some other things, for example. So you can see here that when she's at 760 pixels wide, then she's going to do something different. Now, why do you think she used 760 pixels? Because the resolution of the iPad is 760 pixels. So you'll start seeing some of these numbers that will kind of kind of throw themselves out there. Now, there's a little bit of a debate around this, right? Because the whole concept of media queries is that we didn't necessarily think about devices. We thought about the capabilities of it. But what you're seeing right now is that a lot of people are thinking about some of the devices or the well-known devices that are out there. And the good part is that if you have a special quirky device that your industry uses, the good part is that you can build media queries especially for that. But it's something to consider. And then you'll notice here, for example, that since now the window is much smaller, actually lower than 550 pixels, she actually comes in and decides to use the 64-bit imagery instead. And one of the things that I tend to do, is I tend to use some of the F12 tools to debug particular things. So for example, the ruler that I used earlier, what I'll do is I'll go in and I'll create a ruler at 760 pixels. So here, for example, we'll just go ahead and create this one at 764. And then what happens is when I pull this in, when I hit my ruler, if you can see it, we should see that there's definitely a change. So for example, you saw that when I when I went past 760, all of a sudden the spacing between my text opened up a bit. And so what you can do is you can kind of set up these various rulers to kind of test, and you can kind of pull it over and see, hey, does this fire off when I get to my particular ruler that I created for that? The other interesting thing as well is that you can see what's coming down the pipe. So here, for example, let me get this set up. I'm going to go in and start this back up. I'm going to go in and clear the cache, so I can clear the browser cache just for this particular domain. I'm going to say yes. And then what I can do is I can actually start capturing network traffic coming across. And so what happens is when I pull this in, come on, let's see. You'll notice what happens is that it actually tells me that, oh, yeah, I actually went out and got these 64-bit images for you. So this is kind of another good way of using the tools that are in the F12 developer tools to kind of find out what's going on with your queries and also finding out if they're firing off or not. The other thing that a lot of folks will do as well is they will create custom resizing. So what you can do is you can say, hey, for if I'm going to kind of try to reflect an iPad in my browser, I can come in here and say, yes, I want to do 760 by whatever, or if I want to do an iPhone, I can do 320 by 480 and create those, and then I can just go ahead and resize and see what it's going to look like instead of jamming the window back and forth. So some kind of really cool tools that exist to make your lives hopefully a little bit easier. So what about devices? So I've got a question for you. What is the pixel width of an iPhone, of a regular iPhone? Pixel width across? 320 pixels across. Now, if I turn it horizontally and I ask it, hey, Mr. iPhone or Mrs. iPhone, how many pixels across is it now that I've gone horizontal? What does it tell me that it is? We would think it would say 480, right? It gives us 320 again. It actually lies to us. And you might be going, well, why would my iPhone lie to me? Because this thing never lies to me. It's my prized possession. Next to your Windows phone, of course. Don't send me the emails and the tweets. But what happens is that it will actually tell you that it's 320 pixels. Now I have a trick question for you. The iPhone 4 has a higher resolution, double the resolution. So how many pixels across, if it's 320 pixels, and it's now twice that with the iPhone 4, how many pixels across should it tell me that it's going to be? It should say 640. The people over here are right. What does it say? 320. It screws with our heads, right? And we go, and here's how it plays out. What you'll do is you're going to go directly to your homes, to your, maybe you're going to the hotel, maybe you're going to go to a pub or a bar, and you're going to start doing media queries because you were so overwhelmed that you're like, I can't do anything else, but I've got to go start playing around with these media queries. And so you'll build it, you'll get your browser window, and you're pulling it back and forth, and you're like, this is the best thing ever. And then what happens is you get your mobile device, and you go up to the site that you posted it at, and then it doesn't work. And you're like, what kind of bill of goods has Thomas just sold me on? Well, what the problem is just like what we talked about, in that these phones sometimes will lie to us. And the reason that they're lying to us is because they're actually trying to figure out for themselves how to make something look. So that's why, for example, with an iPhone, when you go to a normal site, it kind of scrunches everything down, right? And it looks proportionally right. And then when you turn it, you would think, well, it's going to do something different. It really doesn't do anything different. All it does is it magnifies it so that it looks right when it's in its kind of horizontal position. And so what are we to do about this? Well, Apple thought about this, and they came up with a meta tag called viewport. It's not a standard thing yet. W3C doesn't have a spec on the viewport meta tag, but what's nice is that most mobile devices out there totally support it. And basically what the viewport meta tag does is says, I have built something for a mobile experience, so don't lie to me, or I'll catch you and hunt you down. No, it doesn't say that. But what it does do is it says this site understands the mobile context. Let me control it. And so what you do is you give it a viewport, and then you define that the content equals width equals device width. And so what you do is you say, I want to override how you think about the content here. And so what you do is you say that we think that the width that you're giving me should equal your device width. And then we start getting the right things. And then now our media queries will begin to work, and we'll be happy campers. Now the thing is that you will do this, and when you bring up your phone, it'll work. And you'll be like, yay, awesome. And then you'll turn it to its side, and then it's going to look like, you know what. And you're going, well, what the heck happened? And it's because we go back to that kind of forced zooming. So what you can also do is you can also define that the maximum zoom is 1.0, which means that, hey, I don't want you to zoom any more than what you actually have the pixel width for. And that fixes that problem. So the viewport is one of those things that you're just, it's real easy. You can just put it in. You can probably find someone else's viewport thing, cut and paste it, put it in, and it's just going to magically work, which I love that kind of thing. Now, what about non-supportive browsers? Well, if you are interested, there is a polyfill called CSS3 Media Queries JS by Wouter van der Graaf, which is kind of nice because you don't have to do anything special. You just actually include this piece of JavaScript, and boom, it does all the magic for you. So it will go in, look at your queries, do the JavaScript stuff behind the scenes. Now you can imagine that there is a bit of a performance hit with this, so be aware of that. And then also, if you're interested in something that's a little more lightweight but doesn't have the full set of features, there's a thing called Respond.js that you can use just as well. Here's some other things that you should think about when you're using media queries and when you're using mobile apps. So you should think about adjusting your elements to make them more touch friendly. So you may want to make the touch area much bigger. You may want to adjust text for readability. This is the one thing that I see a lot of people don't do. They'll change out images, they'll move things around, but then they won't think about the text. And I can guarantee you that if you have bad text, it's not going to look good and people are not going to want to read your content. Also, if you have very long, if you have a very long page within the mobile context, you may want to insert jumps to get you back to the top. What's nice is the iPhone, for example, allows you to hit the top and it'll scroll right back up. Not all phones do that, and so it's real annoying when you get to the bottom and then you want to get back to the top and you got to do this little thing. It's kind of crazy. You also may want to do image swapping. So one of the things that we talked about was this problem of, if we're using, Ethan Marcote's original thing of, hey, let's have this image at its highest resolution and we'll just scale it down, that's not really what we want. And then I showed you this kind of other polyfill that you could use to get around that. What's kind of cool is that in IE10, and some other people are starting to think about putting this in their browsers as well, is there are something called media query listeners, where now what we can do is we can actually react to media queries during runtime and via JavaScript. So we can do things like, for example, we can say, hey, before I load this page, what's the resolution? If the resolution is high, then I'm going to go off and grab these images and put them down. If not, then I'm going to have these lower images. Now again, the hard part is that if you don't believe in JavaScript, then you're kind of out of luck on this. But this is something new that's coming from the W3C, so we're kind of really excited that we're going to start seeing this. And so you'll be able to tweak quite a bit more than you can today with media queries. Now you might be saying to yourself, well, gosh, these media queries look really good, but I don't want to take the time to have to figure them out. And, isn't there someone who's already done the work for me? And that's the best part of the internet, right? For people who are lazy like me, someone's already done the work and you can just grab it. So here, for example, there's a gentleman named Andy Clark. He actually wrote a book called Hard-Boiled, is it Hard-Boiled CSS or Hard-Boiled Web Design, something like that. It's hard-boiled, by the way. And I absolutely love this guy because he's real kind of edgy, and so when everyone else is like, oh, we should be progressive enhancement and think about older browsers, he's like, no, let's just do awesome stuff. And I'm like, I like this guy. So what he did was he saw CSS3 media queries and he was like, oh wow, this is good stuff. I'm going to write my own CSS style sheet for it. And then he ended up saying, well, I'm just going to go ahead and give it out to the world. So sure enough, he gives it out. It's a Creative Commons, so you can grab it, you can rework it, and then you can give it out to friends and relatives. It makes great stocking stuffers around the holidays. And then what he basically did was he went in and just put styles around things that are important. So for example, he's got here where it's looking for a device width of 320 pixels and 480 pixels, so you can imagine what smartphone he's thinking about. There's also where he has the minimum width of 321 pixels, so at that point he's thinking about that same device, but in a landscape mode. Then you can see here where he actually styles out for particular iPads, desktops and laptops, very large screens, and then he even looks at high pixel ratio devices like the iPhone 4. And for that particular one, he actually does uses a vendor prefix of the WebKit prefix for that, which again, if you were in my earlier session, you know that that's okay. So again, if you go to my website, you'll find that I have a link to that there, so you don't have to actually write that down. Oh, we are going to get out early. It's going to be awesome. Okay, so here's the book that I totally recommend. It's called Stunning CSS3 by Zoe Mickley-Gillenwater. All the things that I've talked about in this session and the previous session, she talks about in her book. She does a really good job of actually walking you through an app and how it works on various devices. I like this book in particular because she doesn't just sort of regurgitate the help file to you. She actually talks about real world things like, because a lot of times what will happen is I'll read something and it won't talk about, hey, why did you move the navigation from the left side up here? Or why did you do the navigation in this way? Why did you change columns and stuff like that, right? Because, like, for example, most people don't know the average column should be 8 to 12 words. Who knew? But she knew this, and a lot of the good designers out there do too. And so what she does is she actually incorporates that in the book. So you learn a lot of these nifty little tips and tricks that she has in the book. So it's an amazing, amazing book. I have the physical version of it and the digital version. How many of you all go to Smashing Magazine? Okay, if you don't go to Smashing Magazine, you've got to start going. The gentleman that runs it, his name is Vitaly, and he's just a great guy. And they talk about all kinds of things on Smashing Magazine. They're designer-oriented, but there's a lot of things I think that developers could get some good stuff out of. And in fact, this particular article that was written has just an amazing amount of material. I'm not going to walk through every piece of it, but I'm going to actually just scroll through all the responsive design stuff that they have. And I will scroll. And I will scroll. And I will continue to scroll. The images are still trying to pop in because I'm scrolling. I think you get the point. There's a lot of stuff that you can take a look at. So please definitely take a look at that article if you're really wanting to get deep within the responsive web design stuff. This site is so much fun. So all it is exactly what you see. It's a list of sites that use responsive web design. So all the sites that I've shown you are actually up here. And what you can do is you can basically go look at Naomi Atkinson's site, click on this, and then you can sit there and just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And then there's about 10, 15 pages of these. So I'm guaranteeing you, if you go to bed, if you go back to the hotel early tonight or back home early tonight, it's going to take you about an hour or two to get through this because you'll just be like, wow, this is just awesome. So it is. And I know right now you're probably going, yeah, this crazy American, saying, why am I going to get excited about this? And then tonight when you're doing it, you'll be like, I'm really excited about media queries. All right. And then finally, the W3C has the spec for CSS3 media queries. And like I have said before earlier in the morning, if you are having trouble sleeping, go ahead and read this because it is boring. As much as I love CSS3 media queries, and I do, it's my favorite feature of HTML5, this thing is just difficult to read. But the good part is the specs really weren't meant necessarily for us to read. It's more for the browser vendors and things like that. And both the W3C and the other WhatWG group, they both now have done sort of readable versions of their specs. And so it does make it a lot easier for web authors to take advantage of this stuff and actually read through it. But yeah, I'm telling you, go get Stunning CSS3 book. Don't read that. It'll put you to sleep. All right. Now, I told you there was this fourth thing that Ethan has been sort of talking about. And that fourth thing is design. And I'm sorry, developers, I know that you're going, great, another design talk. But one of the things that we need to think about is, do we start with mobile first? And I would say that we should think about that. Doesn't mean that, and the reason why I say that is because mobile is not, you shouldn't think of mobile in the context of, I have my phone and I'm walking around looking at it and, don't put too much on there because I'm busy doing things, That's not the mobile context. Because if I think about mobile, a lot of the mobile work I do is in my hotel room, when I'm at home. I might have the device sitting there in my lap. It's definitely mobile, but it doesn't mean that I want anything less, right? Because if I want to find out about tech ed, I don't want you to take all these things away from me because you think I'm actually walking while I'm looking at tech ed stuff. What you want is you want to think about, what is the context of someone who's going to use this? Also, is it best that all sites are responsive? This is kind of a question that's still being sort of debated because if you kind of look at this from a philosophy, you're saying, wow, this is kind of a write once, run anywhere type of situation, isn't it? And the answer is that yes, it could be that. But you may have various mobile needs that are not going to be well reflected in an app. Your desktop app may be so complex and complicated and has tons of layout features and has features that have been there since 1992 that you can't really do it, and you got this weird Java applet that does something over here, and we stuck it into this little space so that it wouldn't mess with the rest of the website. And it may just not be the easiest thing to go in and make that responsive. But I would say that if you look at a lot of things, especially where you have sites that are just reflecting information and content, then it's very easy to go ahead and make those responsive. The other thing that's really interesting is, do we need or want to do visual comps for every device? So we've kind of had this world where what happens is a designer would go in and they would give you a visual comp of the website, right? So here's the home page, here's the about page, here's this. And then we would go, oh, we need mobile. And they would go, okay, no problem. They would get their Photoshop out and they would give you, the comp for that. Well, what if we're doing Android devices where there's tons of stuff? What if we want to jump on Windows Phone, iPhone, and let's say there's the new hologram device that all the kids are, crowing about. How do we add that? So now we've got to wonder, do we really want to do visual comps? Maybe for the designers in the room, we should think about, do we get away from visual comps and go from wireframing, which is an IA exercise, over to actually building prototypes within HTML. So something to think about. We talked about don't dismiss mobile as walking and looking something up. The cool part in the end is that we're at the beginning of responsive web design. So not all answers have been figured out. In fact, there's a lot of people who are questioning. But I would say that you're going to find that most people are now going to ask for this, right? So I think what happened was, remember back in the day when your boss would come in and go, hey, I read the latest journal and it said we need some Ajax, so get that Ajax on our website, thanks. And they'd walk off and you'd be like, they don't even know what they want, but they read it somewhere, right? You got to have some Ajax. HTML5, we're sort of seeing that now, right? Where the boss, pointy hair, hey, guess what? I read this cool thing on HTML5. All the kids are doing it. Put some HTML5 on our stuff. All right, thank you. And you're like, oh, okay. I think responsive web design will have a similar effect, where I think that a lot of people will say, yes, we should be thinking about future-proofing our websites and our web apps so that whatever the device is, we can just kind of amend appropriately versus writing kind of net new code for that. Now, Ethan Marcotte, after he wrote that, the people at A Book Apart asked him to write a book, and he has a book called Responsive Web Design. It's beautiful because it's about 150 pages. It's real thin. It's something that you can kind of take on a vacation, and your spouse doesn't get upset because, oh, you're working. You're like, no, I'm just reading this fun little book here. You can also get it, on your iPhone and your iPad and your Windows Phone and things like that. So check it out. It's at abookapart.com. They also have other books as well. They've done on content strategy, HTML5, CSS3. They're nice little books, and they're reasonably priced too. They're not like exorbitant for the size that they are. So what I want to do is to let you go just a little bit early. The decks, the demos, the links, and all that are on asimplepixel.tumblr.com. If you're interested in responsive web design and you love HTML5, and if you also are into horror movies and death metal, then you can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Lee. And again, I'm not that Tommy Lee from Motley Crue. It's again kind of weird because when you get the little email that says this person is following you, I can usually look at the little avatar and I can tell oh, okay, yeah, this one is for Mr. Tommy Lee. But I do put up a lot of things that I find around HTML5, so feel free to follow me or not. And what I want to do is just say thank you very much for this full room for something that I'm really passionate about.